Beach FM, locals talking to locals.
I've got the man himself, John Kennedy from the Kapiti Aviation Museum, waiting patiently for us. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Nigel.
You don't get into the Guinness, so we'll get into aviation, shall we, this morning?
Well, that's pretty undrinkable, isn't it?
It's it could be unpalatable at the moment.
It could be green, I'm not too sure about
that's
that.
Right, yes. Yeah.
Hey, Nigel, I just wanted to talk about, it's very much in the news at the moment, Paraparaumu Airport, or Kapiti Landing, and there's lots of flack flying around, and possibly understandably. And I don't think Air New Zealand's intention to cease all services from Kapiti as of the 3rd of April has actually been met with largely dismay in the district, particularly with the very short notice that the airline gave. And the reason given was a shortage of pilots, but that makes me speculate a little bit. But this may or may not be, but it's hard not to suspect that the aircraft used can be more profitably employed on more lucrative routes.
That's what's been suggested, isn't it?
Yeah. But having said that, airline scheduling can be very complicated. I remember going way back to the NAC days. You get a lot of push me, pull me. My time in Hawke's Bay or Napier Airport, we wanted to get a service, a second service to go back to Auckland. And of course, to do that, you had to make the aeroplane leave Auckland a lot earlier. The people in Auckland weren't too pleased about having to leave at 5:45 in the morning.
Right.
So it's a push me, pull me sort of a thing.
Yes.
And I suspect that's what's going on behind the scenes at Air New Zealand with their route management. Airline scheduling, as I mentioned, can be pretty complicated. My NAC experience tends me to suggest is that they have got more profitable things to do with the aeroplane. Basically, it's not a great frequency in services, and when you start looking at the likes of Napier or Nelson or New Plymouth, Hamilton, they're probably squeezing the barrel a wee bit to get the number of seats that they want. And I guess it's a company here in New Zealand, and it's there to make a profit for its shareholders. And I think their PR, in terms of the way they announced it, was an absolute disaster.
Yes.
I would imagine there'd be one or two backsides at Faulty Towers, i.e. head office in Auckland, that might have been soundly booted.
Yes.
Because 6 days before the announcement, they had a Q300 at the airport and they had an open day, so everyone can have a look at the wonderful aeroplane that flies from Paraparaumu to Auckland,
yes.
And the reverse of that as well.
I don't think they were overly keen on being at that air display open day, were they?
I don't know, no, but someone should have pulled the plug well before.
Yes,
it happened,
that's right. Yes,
but in some ways, perhaps one could have seen it coming, because it was about 3 years ago with the Beach 1900 fleet, which was Eagle Air. Of course, that was totally owned in the end by Air New Zealand, 100%. And they withdrew those aeroplanes in its entirety, and the places that were going to were Wanganui, Taupo, Wakatani and Westport. And I suspect strongly that the profitability just wasn't there, or enough profit. That's a better way to perhaps put it. The airport, when you go back a little bit, was sold by the government for a particularly low price of $1.65 million. And that was a consortium headed by Murray Cole. And parts of the airport were sold off by him and his consortium. And I can think, for example, of the golf driving range that used to be there. That was airport land, which now houses a school, and other adjacent areas went as well, all to make profit from what wasn't used as the airport. And ultimately, Murray Cole sold what remained to another consortium set up by Sir Noel Robinson and merchant bankers. And Sir Noel, I believe, was pretty altruistic in his approach to the whole thing. Particularly the development. He planned to continue operating the airport as a profitable going concern, and you may remember going back that he overcame many very difficult hurdles, including local body plan change number 723, and I thought, gosh, he'd give up. Yes. Because every man and his dog was making it more and more hurdles for him to leap. But he pacified previous Maori owners, the local Aero Club, the Gliding Club and several general aviation operators. And on a more minor basis, where the museum was involved, he made available a peppercorn rental for the Aviation Museum on what became a heritage site, which was included in the plan change. The peppercorn rental was, I think, $1 a year for 15 years. But his major achievement was to entice Air New Zealand to commence operations with the 50-seat Bombardier Q300 aircraft. And I remember Sir Noel telling me that it would have been much easier for him to have, and far more profitable, and to have divided that land up and built houses on it. And I guess that's the big fear, because Paraparaumu Airport is now owned by Todd Corporation, or Todd Property, and I'd hope that they too can continue operating the airport as a going commercial entity. However, we have to remember that companies have obligations to their shareholders who expect their operations to be profitable. Hopefully Todd's, with the support of the KCDC, the Chamber of Commerce, local MPs and local business, can be proactive and seek a replacement operator of operators. But there's another aspect to it too, because Air New Zealand is the majority shareholding is of the government. I don't know how altruistic they're going to prove to be. Maybe there's going to be people beating a path to the local MP's door saying, what are you going to do about it?
Yes.
But again, I have to say to you that it's a commercial entity, and Air New Zealand operates an airline to make a profit.
That's right.
For its
That's what
shareholders.
businesses do, don't they?
So it's not a charity.
No.
And I guess what has to happen is that someone somewhere has to prove that they really need to have a functioning commercial airport here. But I've had a bit of a scout around and to find out what the chances might be, and it's purely speculation on my part, but the likely operators, and there are really only three that have the capability, and I guess number one would be Air Chatham's, and
yes.
the locals, that probably sounds a bit funny, but that airline has expanded quite remarkably in recent years. The other ones are Sounds Air, who are already operating here, and Jetstar. Now, the latter, Jetstar, operate 5 Q300s, identical to the one New Zealand are using here at the moment. I doubt whether they would be interested, particularly with Air New Zealand leaving the scene. And I would imagine they'll be thinking if they're not making a go, then they're unlikely to follow. Their 5 Q300s are probably well committed to other major provincial routes, such as Napier, New Plymouth, Nelson, Palmerston North and Hamilton. And the most promising contenders, to my mind, is Air Chatham's. They operate 3 Saab 340As, 5 Convair 580s, they're quite a large aeroplane, and 4 Fairchild Metroliner 3s, and some people would refer to those as flying pencils.
Pencils, yes.
And 1 Douglas DC-3, for goodness sake.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. And what's actually happened is, well, I'll get back onto Sounds Air. They operate 5 Cessna Caravans and 5 Pilatus PC-12. That's a Swiss aircraft manufacturer. The Caravan seat 12, and the Pilatus PC-12, as the name would suggest, 12 people. No, sorry, 9. And that aeroplane is actually operated by Sounds Air, and they've taken over some of the routes that were happening by Air New Zealand, which they dropped about 3 years ago. But they went into Westport, and this Pilatus PC-12 flies at about 30,000 feet. It carries 9 passengers, and it moves around at 500 kilometres per hour, so
wow.
It flies very fast and very quickly.
Yeah.
But where again, you're replacing a 50-seater Bombardier Q300 out of here. 9 seats not going to really cut the mustard too well, is it?
Fair demand.
Yeah, and they've also got, of course, the Cessna Caravans are operated by Sounds Air out of here, and they're only I think about a 12-seater from memory. And of course they're not pressurised, and they're going to fly below 10,000 feet because people get a bit gaspy. So that's the scenario. But when you look at Air Chatham's, they would seem to be a natural. The Saab 340 that's operated by them, and they took that one over from that Ewan Wilson, who
Kiwi Air, wasn't it?
Well, he originally Kiwi International, yes, but he went belly up, to use a crude expression.
Yes.
But he started again 2 or 3 years ago, you may remember, and he bought this, or leased, or whatever, this Saab A340, which is the type that Air Nelson, in fact, operated not too many years back. And he was going to operate an airline with one aeroplane, that was risky, from Dunedin through to, of all places, to Queenstown to Nelson, and Nelson to Hamilton. And he only had one aeroplane. Of course, that's a bit dangerous, because if one breaks down mechanically for whatever reason, that's it. So the flight is cancelled. Unsurprisingly, it didn't last. It staggered on for a few months and then folded its wings. And the aeroplane actually is now employed by, guess who?
Air Chatham's.
Air Chatham's, yeah. And of course then there's the Fairchild Metroliner. They've got about 4 of those. Each Chathams also got the Convair 580, which I think is primarily used on the Chatham routes. It's got fairly long range. It's got 50 seats on board, maximum altitude about 25,000 feet, pressurised, a couple of pilots and flight attendant. It's got a toilet, which is
that's handy.
Going back to the Saab, that's got similar capabilities. It's only 34 seats. It cruises at 470 kilometres per hour. It's got a maximum altitude of 25,000 feet, pressurised, which is important these days. It's got a toilet, 2 pilots, a flight attendant, and at the moment it's primarily used, I think, Auckland, Wanganui, where they took over from Air New Zealand when they dropped out 2 or 3 years ago. One of the interesting ones that's there is the Air Chathams are operating a DC-3. And they had that up in Tonga. And the Tongan government decided that they didn't want them anymore. They bought a Chinese aeroplane, which no doubt the Chinese flogged off them as quickly as they could. It has a less than reputable reputation in terms of its capabilities and its reliability. And dear old Air Chathams had to bring their DC-3 back. I think it's ZKAWP. I think I might have dispatched it in NAC days.
Is that right?
Way back. And so that one chugs along at not a huge speed. It does about 240 kilometres per hour, unpressurised, got 26 seats and a couple of pilots. But what's happening there, they're operating that in the weekend, this is Air Chathams, and they're using rather more modern aircraft on the weekdays. But what it's stirred up is there's not too many scheduled DC-3 flights around the world at all, and this is one of them. And aviation enthusiasts are arriving at Auckland or Wakatani to go for a ride on the DC-3, so that was a good trick on their part.
Yes, indeed.
But anyhow, it's a bit of a melting pot, Nigel.
Yes.
And what's going to happen is going to be quite interesting, because it's all very well saying that Air Chathams or whoever, ABC Airline, can do it, but they've got to find some aeroplanes. They're already operating routes as it is at the moment, and going back to way back to NAC days, they used to make all sorts of funny decisions and didn't probably look very logical from the outside looking in, but it's a matter of availability of aircraft, and they don't grow on trees, and you had probably a waiting time of about 18 months if you wanted to buy a new one. If you can't buy a new one, you've got to look for a second-hand one somewhere, if it's available. Well, if it's a popular model of aeroplane, the availability is going to be a little bit limited. What NAC used to do, and it was naughty in some ways, and they get routes that were getting saturated with passengers, and when the load factor gets up to about 80-odd%, passengers can't get seats at the times they want to go. So NAC had a very good way of moderating that, because it's set up by Government Act, and they could do all sorts of things because they didn't have any competitors. Well, not in the air anyway. What they would do is put the price up, and of course that would stem the
flow.
But I'm afraid I don't think Air New Zealand can get away with it.
No, I don't think so.
That's a little thumbnail sketch of what I believe.
I think it's a very good thumbnail sketch, and the fact that a lot of people say, "Oh, we're going to protest and do all sorts of things," you'll never get Air New Zealand back here. That's it, gone, finished. They've had their day. So, and I don't think they'd be very popular if they tried to get back, to be quite honest.
Yes, well, they've got to earn themselves a few black marks at the moment, so they've got a bit of repair work to do.
But I just had a look at that Wanganui, Auckland. There's 3 flights Air Chatham do each day. Yeah. Well, it wouldn't take much to come down to Paraparaumu to Wanganui to Auckland, would it?
Yeah, they don't like bending it over doing that. I mean, I did that once in my NAC days with Gisborne, Napier, Wellington. We actually had an aeroplane out of Gisborne that went direct to Wellington, and I was very short of capacity out of Napier, and I could see this thing every day heading out of Gisborne with 20 people on it. It was either a 40 or a 48-seater aeroplane, and it was going begging. It was just flying over top.
Yes.
I was screaming for seats to head south, so I made the move to head office, which we used to refer to as Faulty Towers.
Right.
And they said, "Oh, do you think the people in Gisborne will not be too pleased about all this?" And I said, "Well, I need the seats." So we did it. It was on my head.
Yes.
I can still hear the screams in my ear.
Didn't like the extra landing.
For good citizens from Gisborne.
Yeah. John, we appreciate your time this morning and great evaluation of how you see the situation. No doubt it will be resolved in due course. But,
I hope so, Nigel.
Yeah. We could extend the runway, of course, here and get jets in.
Well,
I better say that with tongue in cheek.
I think your tongue will pop out the side of it.
I was just throwing that in, John. John Kennedy from the Kapiti Aviation Museum.
106.3 Beach FM.